Hello, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG, and welcome to Instant Deck Techs. In this series, we go over everything you need to build a certain commander. We'll go over the strategies and the types of cards needed you need to get the deck working. Any cards we mention will be down in the description below. In this video, we're going to be talking about Gix Yawgmoth Praetor. It is 1 black for a 3/3 legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. It has, whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. It also has pay 4 black and discard X cards. Exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play land cards and cast spells from among the cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. Mono Black has had a lot of really cool commanders recently, and that train doesn't look like stopping with Gix. This is what's going to be known as a Flying Men deck. Anyone who's ever played or seen an Edric deck will know what I'm talking about. The plan is to flood the board with a ton of cheap, evasive creatures. The idea is that they'll come down, swing in, and draw us some cards when they deal combat damage to a player. With those cards, we'll then be drawing more little evasive creatures that we can then play, so that next turn we deal even more damage and draw even more cards. It basically snowballs every turn. We'll also be running other effects that reward us for dealing combat damage to opponents, as well as some cards that reward us for being mono black, such as some powerful ramp cards that'll give us all the mana that we need to activate that bottom ability. Because of all the cards we'll be drawing from our own deck, as soon as we're able to, we can discard a load of small creatures and lands and start playing our opponent's broken cards from their own decks. First up are the Flying Men, as it were. These are cheap creatures with evasion that we know are going to get through for some damage. These cards are really important to the deck, and personally I'd want at least around the 20 mark to feel happy. First up we have cards that are unblockable. These are the premium Flying Men in the deck, and are the only ones I would go up to 2 mana for. You have Changeling Outcast and Tormented Soul, which are just straight up unblockable. And then you have your shadow creatures and your creatures with horsemanship, which unless you're playing the mirror, will also be unblockable. The next tier of creatures is ones that are basically unblockable. Apart from the odd creature with Death Touch and Fear, we're mainly going to be looking at cheap creatures with flying. Ideally as well, these also only cost 1 mana. All we really want from these is the cheapest way to deal 1 point of combat damage to an opponent, so we can draw a card off of Gix. Outside of creatures, you have cards like Bitterblossom, which make us a flying attacker every turn. Absolutely perfect for this deck. And then we have Mortarion, Daemon, Primarch. While this doesn't make Flying Men, it is itself a big lad with flying. The way I like it, however, is that in this deck we will be consistently losing a fair bit of life. Also, because we want to activate that ability of Gix, the deck is going to generate a lot of mana. Those two things work really nicely with Mortarion. Lose some life, pump the mana into Mortarion, make a really large board state ready to swing through on the next turn. Okay, next up is our ramp section. Although a lot of the cards will cost 1 or 2 mana, to really pop off we want to be activating Gix's 7 mana ability, so we're going to want a bit more than a regular deck, ideally between the 10 to 12 range. First up is Grim Hireling, perfect in this deck as we'll all but be guaranteed to make 2 of those treasures every combat step. Then we have Cabal Coffers and Magus of the Coffers. These both tap for mana equal to the amount of swamps that we control, which in a mono black deck like this should be a lot. You then have Crypt Ghast, Nirkana Revenant, Extraplanar Lens and Caged Sun. These all make our swamps tap for an extra mana, and again, in a mono black deck like this, making each land tap for 2 or 3 mana is going to be insanely good, and will give us so much mana to plough into our big spells. A note on Extraplanar Lens is that this will make all of your opponent's swamp tap for 1 more as well, so you can do the cheeky thing here of running snow-covered swamps. When you do this, it makes only snow swamps tap for double, which the majority of the table will not be running. It does make the deck a bit more expensive, but it is something to consider. With that previous sequence of cards all caring about swamps, you can also run Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, to make it and all of our utility lands also into swamps, so that they get the benefit of those cards. We can also use other cards to add the amount of swamps that we have in play. You have Wayfarer's Bauble to just go and get a swamp and put it into play. You have Canoptek Wraith, which is a nice unblockable creature that we can also sack to go get 2 swamps and put them into play. And then we have trusty Solemn Simulacrum for some ramp and some card draw on a 4 mana body. We then also have Sword of the Animist, which is perfect to stick on an evasive creature nice and early so that we can ramp ourselves further every time it attacks. After those, we have our mana rocks. There is absolutely plenty of options out there to choose from, but cards like Sol Ring and Arcane Signet will just be really solid. And then you also have rocks like Thought Vessel and Decanter of Endless Water that give us no maximum hand size. With all the cards we'll be drawing off of Gix, they will be fantastic. Then we have some one-time ramp on instants. I'm not normally a fan of these in most commander decks, as you generally want your ramp to be there turn after turn. In this deck, however, this can let us get Gix out super early, or even when Gix is out, it lets us make an instant board state of cheap attacking creatures that we can then turn into card draw. In this deck, I think these could be very explosive options. And then finally for our ramp, we have Bontu's Monument. This discounts our black creature spells by 1 generic mana. Making all our 2 mana creatures cost 1 is great, or Gix costing 2 is also great. But why this warrants an include to me is the life drain this gives us when we play those creatures. Remember, we do lose life when we draw a card with Gix, so this just helps give us that little extra buffer that we need to keep us alive so we can actually go ahead and win the game. Moving over to our card draw now, and although Gix will do a large portion of this, we still need a little extra to just make up for it if it's ever removed or before it's in play. First up is Mask of Memory. Stick this on one of our unblockable creatures, and you get to draw 2 cards and then discard one. That's on top of the card you'll be drawing from Gix as well, so it's absolutely perfect for this deck. Then we have Bolas's Citadel. With all the cheap creatures in our deck, this could get out of hand very quickly, and it lets us just dump a bunch of them from the top of our library into play. This is generally a really solid backup to Gix. We then have Braids of Risen Nightmare. If all of our small flyers ever get outclassed, we can cash them into Braids to either make our opponents get rid of a real creature or give us some extra card draw. Then we have instants that also draw us some cards. These are great budget options that'll keep us ticking over until we can get Gix out again. These are absolutely perfect for the deck. Okay, let's move over to our interaction. Like with most decks, you want to start with 8 bits and go up from there the more competitive your playgroup is. We're kicking off strong with Umezawa's Jitte. It just does so much in this deck that we want. We'll easily get the counters on it thanks to our evasive creatures. Then we can pump up those creatures if we want to get more damage through, or more likely, kill off some small creatures of our opponents, or gain us some life if we've drawn too many cards with Gix. For some more standard options, we have some of the best bits of targeted removal going. With all the swamps we're running, Defile should be able to take out anything that we need it to. Then cards like Infernal Grasp and Baleful Mastery can just answer anything going. Then because we know we're going to have swamps, Snuff Out lets us be tapped out and still hold up some removal, which is a great option to have. For some repeatable removal, we also have Font of Agonies. We will be paying a lot of life in this deck, and it's not hard to see a world where we could use this once per turn cycle to take out a threat. Really solid in the deck. For board wipes, we again have plenty of options. With all the swamps, Mutilate is a really great card here. You then have your standard, solid, but a bit pricey cards like Damnation. But then fortunately, because of all of our ramp, we can run some more mana intensive ones like Decree of Pain. Like with any deck that revolves around the commander, we'll need some protection to help keep it out and around. There will also be a bit of protection for our own life total as well, as we might be painting a bit of a target on our back. First up, we have cards that can protect our commander from targeted removal. We again are talking about Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, but we can also look to running Commander's Plate as a great way of giving Gix protection from everything but black. And it also has the added bonus of making it a great attacker or blocker as well. You then have effects that bring a creature back from the graveyard to play if it's ever removed. They might see it coming, but Kaya's Ghost Form is just a really solid card. Then Malakir Rebirth and Undying Evil are great one-time effects to protect Gix from a removal spell or a board wipe. To protect our own life total, we have cards that incentivize players to attack each other. Gix already does this, but in a deck like this that attacks a lot, we will be wide open on a board with a lot of enemies quite a bit of the time. Cunning Rhetoric gives us some card advantage from our opponent's decks and could lead us to taking a key piece away from them. And then No Mercy is a card I wish was cheaper because its effect is just so strong. Yes, you may take a hit from a creature, but you know it won't be coming back for seconds. The next section isn't essential, but I personally don't like leaving home without a little bit of recursion in my commander decks, just so we have a backup plan in case some of our key creatures ever get removed. First up is Whip of Erebos, which is absolutely fantastic in this deck. It lets us bring back a key creature once per turn, which is just really solid, but the main reason I'm going to run it is the lifelink buff to all of our creatures. This will be absolutely invaluable and will negate one of the main downsides of Gix. Next up, we have a bit of a niche card, but I really like Necromantic Thirst in this deck. Put it on an evasive threat, and then it'll just keep getting in and getting a creature back turn after turn. I know your opponent removing the creature that this is on isn't great, as we'll lose 2 cards, but if they're doing that instead of killing Gix, we're going to be pretty happy. Then lastly, we have Phyrexian Reclamation, which is one of the first cards I ever played with. This little enchantment can be a fantastic anti-board wipe tech and allows us to re-go our board ready for them to go again. Okay, we have Gix, we have our flyers, and we have the bits in place to get us there. Now let's go over some dedicated ways of winning the game. You really can tailor this section to suit how you like to win. First up, we have Vorpal Sword. This could be a really cruel way of nerfing a player out of the game completely, but I'm kind of here for it. Put this on an evasive blocker, pay 8 mana, and take out a player. It seems really clean and really deadly in this deck. In a similar vein, but not quite as deadly, we have Quiet as Spike. Half someone's life total is normally quite a lot, and it's perfect for keeping those life gain players in check. Still looking at those evasive creatures getting through for damage, we can run some cards that pump up their power so they do even more damage, turning them into a win condition. Then we also have a card like Larceny, that strips a card from someone's hand whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to them. In this deck, with all these evasive creatures, this could completely brick an opponent out of the game. I mean, it's a little mean, but it is very strong. Changing gear a little bit, and we have Shieldred the Apocalypse. That life gain every time we draw a card with Gix will be berserk. This probably could have been in another section, but the combination of this, Gix, and some flying creatures seems absolutely insane. Hopefully it will come down in price a little bit. Next up we have some cards that reward us when we discard cards to Gix's ability. We have Bone Miser, which gives us all manner of things as we bin our hand and play with our opponent's decks. You then have Archfiend of Ifnir, which will annihilate our opponent's board states at the same point that we're putting a load of things into play from their decks. This will be absolutely backbreaking. Then we have Reign of Filth. I put this in the win con section rather than the ramp, as I think that's the mindset you need when you use it, just because it's very all in. Sacking your lands to generate more black mana should only really be used when you're going for that final push to win the game. It's a really strong effect that'll generate a ton of mana, especially when combined with all the other Swamp Matters cards that the deck can run. But I do really think it can push you over the edge and get Gix activated when you need it to. Or, alternatively, you could put all that black mana that we're making into cards like Exsanguinate and Torment of Hailfire. These are both really strong haymakers that can win us a game out of nowhere. A really good backup plan late game if after a couple of board wipes and we don't have that much of a board state. Two last cards I'm going to mention here, and they are Grey Merchant of Asphodel and Crick, Son of Yawgmoth. The life gain swing on Gary could be exactly what this deck needs to stabilise, and if we have any kind of board state, it could be Nights Out for a opponent or two right then and there. Then Crick lets us dump out our hand when we need to set up for the next explosive turn. It also has the added lifelink that this deck will most likely need to keep us in the long game. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, as we're in mono black deck we do have a decent amount of options available to us. First up we have our colourless lands. Contested Warzone is a great way for getting some additional damage through to our opponents. It also adds a nice little sub-game as it goes around the board. Reliquary Tower is then just another way we can keep those cards in our hand. Then Vesuva is a great way of doubling up another of our utility lands, and then War Room is just a free way of drawing us additional cards. We then have even more options when we get to cards that tap for black mana. Bojuka Bog is a free way of nerfing any graveyard decks at the table. Cabal Stronghold is Cabal Coffers at home. Shizo Death Storehouse is a great way of getting a creature through in combat. Tomb Fortress is a reanimation spell, again that's free to run as it's on a land, and then Witch's Cottage is a nice way of putting something relevant back on top of our library that is naturally also a swamp. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.